Hey guys! Tonight we journey to a place where the air smells like salt smoke and something vaguely fermented. You're in a Viking longhouse now, low-roofed and dim, where the rafters creak with the weight of thatch and time. Outside, fog wraps the fjords like a woolen cloak someone forgot to take off before falling asleep in the mud. Inside, you're already awake, and not because you're some great warrior preparing to raid England. No. You've got more pressing matters. Today you're baking bread. Viking bread. The kind that might crack a tooth or summon praise from your mother-in-law depending on how charred the crust turns out. You probably won't survive this, to be honest. Not because of violence, but because baking bread without yeast thermometers, timers, or reliable ovens is, let's just say, not your strong suit. But that's okay. You're here to learn, and maybe to make something edible. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you listening from and what time is it there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift under your fur cloak and grab the heavy barley sack. Grinding it is your first task. Not the nice kind of grinding, with a polished mill. No, this is hand labor with a rough circular quernstone, like trying to sandpaper wheat into flour with your arms alone. The barley's coarse, chewy, and probably full of tiny stones, but it's all you've got. Your fingers are already cold, the floor's damp. Somewhere nearby, someone's goat is bleeding in protest, probably at the same chores you're about to endure. You dump a few handfuls of barley into the upper quern and begin turning the stone. It's slow, it's gritty, and it's surprisingly noisy. Like chewing gravel with your ears. Grain dust fills the air and clings to your skin. It's in your nostrils, your eyelashes, even your beard if you've managed to grow one yet. The flour it yields is grayish and coarse, not the snow-white fluff of modern loaves. This is survival flour. Bread you eat because you're hungry, not because you've got Instagram followers. Still, historians argue whether the Vikings truly saw their bread as mere fuel. Some believe they had favorites, rituals, even recipes passed down orally. Put in just enough water so it sticks to the walls of your bowl and your enemies fear it. Probably something like that. Your hands ache already, but you keep turning. Outside, the sky is just beginning to pale. This isn't the gentle sunrise of a travel brochure. This is a sky that seems to sigh and say, "Fine, I'll get up." You check your progress. There's maybe a handful of flour, just enough for a modest loaf, or a very disappointing pancake. You add more barley, keep turning. The smell of ground grain mixes with the ever-present smoke that clings to the beams of the longhouse smoke that never fully clears thanks to the lack of a chimney. As your grinding continues, you catch a faint conversation behind the wattle walls. Someone's complaining about mold again. Someone else is talking about a lost chicken. It's all very domestic, very real. You're reminded that Viking life was not endless pillaging. It was chores, Bopi, and the occasional goat chase. Finally, your shoulders aching and fingers numb. You finish grinding enough flour for a single sad Viking loaf. You tip the rough powder into a wooden bowl and wipe your hands on your tunic, which is, of course, already filthy. Now comes the water cold from a nearby bucket ladled out with something carved from bone. You pour cautiously, mixing with your fingers. The dough begins to form. It's lumpy, reluctant, and about as elegant as mud, but it's dough. Kind of. You knead it awkwardly. There's no recipe, no precise ratios. Just instinct and a vague memory of what bread should feel like. Is it too sticky? Add more flour. Too dry? Add more water. Too boring? Well, tough. You're a Viking, not a pâtissier. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember a tale of a woman in the next village who added birch bark ash for flavor. Or was it just because she ran out of salt? Historians still debate whether Viking recipes were really just acts of culinary desperation. Probably both. Eventually, you form a crude ball of dough. It rests on the wooden bench like a stubborn rock. You cover it with a cloth more to keep out mice than to encourage any magical rising, and set it near the hearth. But the hearth is cold. The fire hasn't been lit yet, and you're not the kind of person who lets dough rise in comfort. No, you'll have to face the fire next. The hearth greets you with an expressionless gray shrug. Cold stones blackened with old ash and spiderwebs wait patiently for you to do something heroic, like produce fire from damp sticks and hope. You squat in front of it, already regretting every life decision that led to baking bread without modern appliances. Your fire-starting kit is classic Viking minimalism flint steel and a ragged wad of dried grass. Oh, and the pièce de résistance, dried cow dung. That's right. You get to start your day by lighting poop on fire. Not glamorous, but surprisingly efficient if you do it right. You crouch down and strike the flint. Sparks flit off like shy fairies dodging the grass. You try again and again. Eventually, a whisper of smoke curls upward, like it's just as unsure about this arrangement as you are. You blow gently, then more aggressively, nearly going cross-eyed. Finally, the bundle catches a flicker, turns to flame, and you ease the dung in like it's some sacred offering. The smell hits immediately. It's like roasted barnyard with notes of regret. You wince, wipe your nose on your sleeve, and stack some twigs around the tiny blaze, whispering small, desperate prayers to Norse fire spirits, if they exist. Historians still argue whether Vikings invoked deities for mundane tasks like this, or just muttered curses through gritted teeth. Either way, it works. The fire spreads slowly, licking across the bottom of the hearth. You add thicker kindling, then small logs. Heat begins to bloom, pushing back the morning chill. You hold your hands close, rotating your fingers like slow-spinning sausages. There's something primal and oddly soothing about this moment. You fire stone in the steady scent of earthy dung, romantic in the least Instagrammable way. You glance at your dough. It sits there like it's judging you. Now that the hearth's alive, you need to prepare the stone slab that serves as your makeshift oven flat. Heavy and far less cooperative than it looks. It's leaning against the back wall, partially buried in soot and ashes. You heave it into the fire's embrace. It's uneven, cracked in the middle, and weighs about as much as a stubborn reindeer. But it's all you've got. Once it's heated through, you'll bake your bread right on top. No trays, no parchment paper, no dream of perfection. Just crust on stone action and hope. You sit back watching the slab heat up and listen to the village stir awake. Somewhere beyond the walls, someone's goat starts bleeding again. Possibly the same one from this morning, possibly a different one with similar complaints. A dog barks, children squeal. It's a community symphony of minor chaos. You're hungry? Of course you are. Grinding grain burns more calories than it produces. You nibble on a piece of last night's leftover hard cheese. It's firm, salty, and tastes vaguely like the wooden shelf it was stored on. A Viking delicacy, apparently. And now comes the waiting. The stone needs to be thoroughly hot. Not just warm. You want it to hiss when dough touches it. Too cold, and your bread turns gummy. Too hot, and it'll blacken faster than your dignity during a public sword duel. As you sit watching firelight flicker across the walls, your mind wanders. You remember a story told around the mead hall about a woman in a neighboring fjord who once baked her entire wedding dowry into bread loaves. Not metaphorically, she hid actual coins inside. It was either a clever way to transport savings or the reason her new husband broke a tooth and sued for emotional damages. Scholars disagree on the details, as they often do with Viking tales passed down orally and filtered through 1,000 tankards of ale. The fire crackles. The stone glows dull red at the edges. You test it by flicking a drop of water onto its surface. It sizzles and vanishes. Good enough? You return to the dough, which has not risen at all. It just looks sleepier now, flattened and sulky. It's more of a dough pillow than anything with ambition. but you don't take it personally. Yeast in the Viking era wasn't exactly predictable. Sometimes the dough fermented from airborne yeast, sometimes it didn't, and sometimes it smelled like feet and got fed to pigs. Historians still argue whether Vikings understood fermentation or just made peace with frequent disappointment. You shape the loaf by hand, flattening it, tucking in the edges, adding a few thumbprints on top for artistic reasons. Maybe they'll help it bake evenly, maybe not. When the slab looks ready, you gently slide the dough onto it using a carved wooden board. There's no timer, no oven light, no temperature dial. You just wait and watch. Smoke curls upward. The dough hisses faintly. You crouch again, eyes level with the slab, staring at your future breakfast like it might confess something. The smell is actually decent, earthy, toasty, a little like barley, a little like burning bark. A faint optimism stirs in your gut, or maybe that's just the cheese rebelling. Then just as you start to relax, a log shifts, collapses, and sends a flurry of ash all over your loaf. You leap forward, coughing, waving the smoke away. The dough's fine, just dusted. Call it rustic. Call it ash cured. Call it your only option. You sit back down, defeated and amused. The fire dances, the hearth creaks, your loaf slowly bakes or pretends to. And for now, that's enough. The fire keeps purring soft and steady, like it knows it's the most valuable member of the household right now. You shift your weight on the floor, fidgeting with a cracked wooden spoon while staring at the loaf. It's browning now, just the edges, but it's a promising start. There's a faint blister forming across the top, as though the dough is trying to puff out one final breath of resistance before becoming bread. You lean in to sniff. It smells vaguely edible, slightly nutty, possibly inspired by damp moss. You sit back cross-legged and rest your elbows on your knees. There's nothing to do but wait. Again. Bread baking Viking style is 10% action, 90% staring and hoping. Your thoughts drift, as they often do, toward the looming problem of grain. You're almost out. That tiny sack of barley, barely the size of a newborn piglet, has maybe one, maybe two more loaves in it if you're stingy. Grain was never something Vikings took lightly. It was currency, lifeblood, and marital bargaining chip all in one. You remember last autumn's harvest festival where two brothers nearly came to blows over the ownership of a single, particularly plump sack of rye. Their mother had to intervene with a broom and several creative insults. And grain wasn't just hard to come by, it was hard to keep. Rats, damp mold, and the occasional jealous neighbor could reduce your supply overnight. That's why it was often stored in thick wooden chests, sealed with beeswax and paranoia. You begin mentally cataloging your own hiding spots, wondering which one you'll have to raid next. Possibly the stash under your cousin's bed. He never checks. Now the loaf. You poke at it cautiously with a stick. The crust is developing a firm outer shell. Promising. You tilt your head, trying to judge its readiness by ear. It doesn't jingle, which is good. You don't want your bread to make noise. That usually means something's gone terribly, terribly wrong. Your mind drifts again to the grain itself. Not all barley is created equal. Some farmers, especially those living near fjords with deep, mineral-rich soil, swore their grain made bread that could last twice as long without molding. Others claimed that adding crushed juniper or dried seaweed gave the dough extra character. That's one word for it. You tried the seaweed thing once. It made the bread green and slightly bitter. Your uncle loved it. Your goat did not. There's also the matter of grinding it properly. The difference between flour and sort of flour is vast in the Viking kitchen. Those giant rotary querns, two massive stones stacked like tired pancakes, took hours to crank. And if you didn't clean them well, your flour would taste like whatever the last batch was. Fish-flavored rye bread, anyone. It happened more than once. Historians still argue whether the use of hand querns was considered a domestic chore or a sign of status, because if you could make someone else do the grinding for you, you were probably winning at life. Sort of like modern dishwashers, but louder and with more risk of dislocating a shoulder. Your own quernstone is cracked, of course. You'd meant to repair it last month, but got distracted by a sheep-related emergency. The sheep had wandered into the fish-drying hut. Again. So for now, your flour is a bit coarse. Let's call it textured. You reach over and gently press a finger to the top of the loaf. It gives slightly but doesn't collapse. Encouraging. You tap the bottom with a stick, just like your grandmother taught you. A dull thud echoes back. Still not quite ready. She always said the loaf should sound hollow like a skull in a cautionary saga. Comforting. Outside, the light has shifted. A misty mid-morning fog creeps in around the corners of the house. You tug your cloak tighter. Somewhere a raven caw's probably judging your technique from a nearby roof beam. Ravens are good at this hat. You once saw one fly off with an entire pancake just because it could. Back in the hearth, embers glow under the stone. You shift the loaf a little, rotating it so it doesn't burn on one side. The crust crackles in response. You could almost imagine it sighing like it too is tired of this prolonged ritual. You take the moment to reflect on how central bread is to your whole life. It's not just food, it's comfort, routine, survival. When a long ship sets out to sea, they pack dried flatbreads for the voyage. When someone dies, the mourning family might leave a slice beside the body. When two people wed, they share a loaf, cracking it together with salted butter, if they're lucky enough to have both. Yet despite its centrality, bread isn't always respected. Not the way mead is or roasted meats. Bread is background. It's the edible tablecloth of Viking meals. Always there, rarely appreciated. You think about all the women in the village who make it daily. The grandmothers with iron knuckles, the young girls learning to knead with more enthusiasm than accuracy, even the occasional stubborn bachelor like yourself baking out of necessity and sheer spite. You check the loaf again. It's close. The edges are crisp, the top golden, and the bottom finally offers that hollow sound you were waiting for. Success, or something that resembles it closely enough. With a wooden spatula, you nudge the loaf off the stone, set it on a linen scrap, and just admire it. Your humble, slightly smoky, cow-dung-kissed creation. It is not beautiful, it will not win awards, but it is yours. Steam wafts off it. The crust has a satisfying give when you press your thumb into it. You tear off a corner, burning your finger slightly, and take a bite. It's warm, dense, a little chewy, faintly gritty like all good Viking breads are. You chew, swallow. You do not die. A win. You exhale slowly and settle back your morning toil, finally bearing fruit. Well grain. You think of the old joke. What do you call a Viking who eats soft bread? Spoiled. You smile to yourself, stretch out your legs, and let the warmth of the hearth seep into your bones. Your mouth is still full of that last bite of bread as you reach for a small clay pot of goat cheese. It's seen better days, the pot and the cheese both, but the tangy crumble adds a welcome lift to your rough and ready loaf. You smear a little across the warm crust with your thumb, tear off another piece, and chew slowly. The saltiness cuts through the grainy heft, almost luxurious, really. You might just survive today after all. But not everyone is so lucky. Your neighbor's oven, if you can call it that, collapsed last week after a poorly timed sneeze and a misguided kick. He's been bartering for hearth time ever since, wandering around like a breadless ghost. You offered once, and he showed up with his dough and a suspicious ferret. You haven't repeated the offer. You glance at your own hearth, modest, cracked in 3 places but stubbornly functional. It's an earth oven dug slightly below floor level, lined with stones blackened by hundreds of meals and a few minor disasters. Viking ovens varied wildly. Some were portable clay domes, set outdoors, others ingeniously adapted into the central hearth. But most were like yours, a pit of stone slab and a daily prayer to Thor that nothing exploded. Still, even with its quirks, the oven is sacred space. It's where the day begins and ends, where the meals are born, and where gossip often lands. People say you can judge a household by its oven. Yours. Perhaps a bit too smoky, slightly uneven in heat but loyal. Like a scrappy dog that occasionally bites. You lean over and rake the coals gently to one side with a charred stick. It's a rhythm now. Second nature sweep. The embers lift the stone place the next dough disc with practiced ease. This batch has more cracked oats mixed in. The texture will be assertive. You remember your aunt who swore by pine ash as a crust improver. Claimed it added a certain brightness. More likely, it added a hint of forest fire. Still, she lived to 90 and had all her teeth. Coincidence? Historians still argue whether Viking cooking was strictly practical or if it veered into culinary experimentation. There's evidence of creative additions. Apple slices, dried berries, powdered herbs, and even a few daring fish pastes added to doughs. Some say these were survival techniques, stretching flour and masking spoilage. Others suggest they simply had adventurous taste buds or no taste buds at all. You, for one, once tried a loaf made with powdered bark. Just once. Now, with the coals pushed aside, you lower the fresh disc of dough onto the stone. It lands with a soft hiss. You cover it with a half-dome lid made from shaped clay, chipped and smoky, but still clinging to its job. Heat builds inside like a secret. You sit back on your heels, watching as wisps of steam curl out around the edges. There's something meditative about this. You find yourself relaxing into the firelight, the quiet crackle, the smell of baking grain. No raids today, no arguing with neighbors over fence posts, just this slow, steady rhythm of bread making, ancient, humble, and slightly gritty. Your thoughts drift again. How many generations have done this exact dance? Vikings are better known for their ships and swords, but those things are flashy outliers. Most folks didn't swing axes at monasteries. They swung dough into bowls. They kneaded. They waited. They burnt a few. They bragged about the ones that didn't. You recall the old sagas buried between tales of gods and giants, our lines about daily bread. A woman feeding her children with grain scavenged during a harsh winter. A man returning from battle to break bread with his kin. Loaves offered at funerals, at births, even during oath swearings. Bread, in a way, was a promise. It meant continuity. You remember a story your grandmother told you, half legend, half weather report, about a year when the barley didn't grow. A freak summer snow had killed the crops. Families survived on acorn meal and dried moss. Bread was a memory that year, a story passed down alongside hunger. She always ended it with the same line, "That's why you never mock a crust." Outside, the wind has picked up slightly. A gust slips through the roof beams and rustles a strip of dried seaweed you'd hung to smoke. You glance at your bread dome. Time to check it. You lift the lid slowly, letting the heat escape in a ghostly rush. The dough has risen slightly, its edges browned and curling. You touch the crust with a fingertip. Not quite there, but close. You replace the lid, gently preserving what heat you can. Somewhere across the village, a dog barks lazily. A few chickens argue near the compost heap. Life goes on. Bread keeps baking. You find yourself absently humming an old baking song, something about not angering the spirits of the grain. It had a nonsense chorus involving trolls and sour milk. You can't remember the words, but the tune sticks. Your grandmother sang it with a ladle as a baton. You sing it now with a stick poking embers. It's strange how rituals form. Even now in this smoke-warmed, slightly crooked hut, you're part of something bigger. A rhythm older than stories, older than ships. You and your ancestors and probably a dozen unacknowledged mice all drawn to the same humble hearth. Another glance at the loaf. This time when you tap it with your knuckle, it sounds right. Hollow. You pry it up gently, placing it beside the first loaf to cool. A second act, slightly rounder, possibly more edible. You sit back, stretch your legs, and sigh. The smell is heavenly if your idea of heaven includes burnt oats and hope. You hear a knock at the door. It's your neighbor. Not the one with the ferret, thankfully, but the one with the missing front tooth and too many opinions about yeast. He peers and sniffs dramatically and raises an eyebrow. "Good crust," he grunts. You nod. High praise. He leaves you a single apple in trade and walks off before you can ask what's wrong with it. You bite into it anyway. It's sour, mealy, and perfect. Bread baking Viking style, full of hazards, frustrations, and weird apple exchanges. But right now, as the fire hisses and two warm loaves steam gently beside you, it all feels worth it. The loaves cool slowly, steam rising like whispered secrets from their cracked crusts. You nudge them gently to one side of the bench, resisting the temptation to tear into both like a starving bear. Your stomach grumbles in protest, but you've learned patience, or at least a Viking version of it, which involves grumbling, pacing, and occasionally muttering insults at food until it behaves. You glance at your carving knife and think maybe just a small slice. But before you can act on that dangerous impulse, your eye catches the flicker of something familiar. Your dough starter sitting alone in its wooden bowl near the hearth, looking as suspicious as ever. Ah yes, the sourdough starter. Or as you've come to call it, your moody pet fungus. It bubbles faintly, a sluggish gurgling protest against being ignored. It smells like overripe apples, damp wood, and something vaguely acidic. Exactly as it should, mostly. You lean in and give it a cautious stir with a carved spoon, watching the globs rise and fall like sleepy volcanoes. Keeping a Viking sourdough starter alive is part science, part witchcraft. You feed it daily flour and water, and pray the gods of fermentation smile upon you. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you end up with a grayish goo that smells like betrayal and rotting socks. You sniff again. This one's on the edge. Playfully dangerous. Historians still argue whether Viking bakers truly understood the microbial magic at play, or whether they simply fed their starters with blind faith and a healthy dose of superstition. Some evidence suggests they gave their starters names like pets. Others believe they offered tiny food scraps to bless the yeast. You once tried blessing yours with a smear of goat butter. It reacted by overflowing violently. Lesson learned. You spoon a bit of the bubbly mess into a fresh bowl and add a handful of flour. It thickens into a paste with all the visual charm of wet porridge. You stir, slowly watching bubbles rise. That's good. Bubbles mean life, or at least survival. You leave the new mix near the fire to ferment. Maybe it'll be ready by tonight. Maybe it'll try to crawl away. Meanwhile, the loaves have cooled enough for slicing. You take the smaller one, less risky to ruin, and cut a wedge from the side. The crust cracks satisfyingly. The interior is dense, chewy, and studded with oat flakes. You chew slowly, thoughtfully. Not bad. It won't win any awards, but it won't kill anyone either. That's a win. Outside, the morning fog has given way to weak sunlight, stretching lazy fingers across the damp ground. You hear the clatter of hooves, the murmur of voices. Someone's returning from the river, likely with fish. A good reminder that while bread is noble, it's rarely eaten alone. You gather a few items for your midday meal. Smoked fish from yesterday still wrapped in birch bark and suspiciously oily. A small jar of last autumn's cloudberry jam. And a chipped cup of thin, lukewarm ale. The full Viking spread. You sit by the hearth, tear another chunk of bread, and begin constructing a feast of contrasts: smoky, sweet, bitter, and chewy. You remember an old saying from your grandfather: bread without a story is just a rock. He'd say this while telling tales of ancient bakers who sang to their dough or wept into their flour during funerals. Maybe he was exaggerating. Maybe not. Your own bread certainly has a story now, crafted in cold dawn light, wrestled into shape, nearly ruined by ash, praised with a grunt, and redeemed with goat cheese. Not bad for a Tuesday. But you're not the only baker in the village. There's Fridas down the path who swears by a rye spruce blend. She lines her oven with moss, which is either genius or fungus-forward insanity. Then there's Arnie, who bakes once a week, but only at night under a full moon while singing badly. No one knows why. He claims the loaves taste better. Everyone else claims he just likes singing where no one can see him blush. The thing is, every Viking household has its own method, its own superstition. Some use wooden mixing paddles passed down through generations, never washed, just scraped and honored like relics. Others stir counterclockwise only lest they summon bad luck. You once tried clockwise just to test it and ended up with a loaf that could serve as a roof tile. You finish your meal chasing the last bite of fish with a sip of warm ale. The fire crackles contentedly. Your sourdough starter gurgles again, more awake now, more alive. You give it a wink. It ignores you. That's fair. You tidy your space brush crumbs into a clay dish for the chickens and check your flour sack. Still dwindling. Time to plan another grinding session soon, or perhaps convince someone else to do it with promises of warm bread and lies about how fun it is. But before you do anything else, you look again at your loaves, still fragrant, still whole, and let a small, sleepy smile creep across your face. This is the peaceful peril of Viking baking. The work, the waiting, the endless swirl of dough, superstition, and smoke. A rhythm that never quite ends. And honestly, you wouldn't have it any other way. By now, your sourdough starter is audibly bubbling like a satisfied swamp creature, and you're trying not to take it personally. It's strange to think of something so simple, just flour and water, being so temperamental. Then again, it's alive. Sort of. Like a quiet roommate that occasionally hisses at you if ignored. You give it a final stir and cover the bowl with a scrap of linen that once belonged to someone's tunic. Clean probably, maybe. You glance out the open doorway as a breeze curls in, carrying scents from the village, wood smoke, sea salt, and onions. Someone's left too close to their hearth. It's nearly noon and things are in full swing now. The clatter of carts, distant hammering, the communal feeling of people trying not to starve. You're considering a short walk when you remember the grain mill is due to open today. Not the big communal one, but that odd new hand mill your cousin Haldor swears by. Portable, supposedly. Revolutionary, he claims. Looks suspiciously like two buckets strapped together with rope. Naturally, you have to see it. So you pack up a small sack of barley and sling it over your shoulder. Your bread cooling beside the hearth gives you a look. Don't worry, you'll be back. Probably. The path to Haldor's hut is muddy from last night's rain. You tiptoe across the slick grass, dodging a goat who looks like it knows something about you that you don't want discussed. You reach his hut and find him hunched over his so-called mill, grinning like he's invented sliced bread, which hasn't been invented yet, of course. You feed it from here, he says, pouring grain into the top bucket. Then you turn this crank, and the flour comes out here, sort of. He gestures at the bottom where a suspicious mixture of dust and pebbles is trickling out. You raise an eyebrow, sort of. He shrugs. Might need more cranking. You try it. The crank is stiff and groans under your grip. After 2 rotations, your shoulder already regrets everything. But sure enough, something vaguely flour-like begins to emerge. It's coarse, uneven, and definitely contains a few mystery particles, but it's technically flour. Haldor beams. Faster than the quern. You nod slowly. Faster, yes, better. Debatable. Historians still argue whether Vikings valued speed or consistency in their grain processing. Some evidence points to large communal grinding days where families shared quernstones, sang songs, and argued about technique. Others suggest that time-saving contraptions like Haldor's were early efforts at mechanical efficiency. You suspect they were just excuses for men to play with wooden gears. Still, the experience gives you an idea. You offer to trade a loaf of bread for an afternoon of using the contraption, and Haldor agrees partially because he's curious what your bread tastes like, and partially because he knows he'll be sore tomorrow. Back at home, you dump the results of your grinding session into your flour bin. It's a mix, all right. You'll need to sift it with your woven sieve to separate the bigger bits. You start the rhythm shake, toss, pat. You find 3 small pebbles, 1 dead beetle, and something that looks like a grain with ambitions of becoming moss. You set it aside just in case it's magical. The filtered flour smells nutty and honest. You run your fingers through it, enjoying the feel. This is the heart of bread, the grind, the effort, the risk that it'll all go wrong and you'll still have to pretend it was on purpose. You begin a new dough. Water, starter, salt, and this rustic personality-filled flour. You mix it by hand in a wide wooden bowl, scraping the sides, folding the mass again and again until your wrists ache. The dough is sticky, clinging like a needy puppy. You dust it with more flour and keep going. The consistency eventually settles firm but elastic like a good tunic stretch. You cover the bowl with your faithful cloth and set it near the hearth. Another round of waiting begins. You sit on the floor beside it, sipping thin broth from a clay mug. It tastes like herbs and mystery bones. You dunk a crust of your earlier loaf into it, soaking the bread until it's warm and soft. You chew slowly, eyes half-lidded, soothed by the heat, the fire, the quiet. Your mind drifts to other Viking villages, how they baked, how they ate, how they endured long winters on stale crusts and hope. You once heard a tale of a settlement where bread was made with powdered fish skin in lean years, supposedly high in protein, also extremely chewy and very smelly. You're lucky. You have fire flour, a starter that hasn't attacked you yet, and a loaf that doesn't double as a blunt weapon. The dough stirs slightly in the bowl, rising slowly. This one might work. Outside, the sun dips low, casting long beams through the doorway. You close your eyes for a moment, just listening to the crackle of fire and the soft hiss of rising dough. It's a peaceful peril, this baking life. One minute you're coaxing life from sour bubbles, the next you're seving beetles out of your flour. But it's all part of the rhythm, and deep down you wouldn't change it. The dough is rising sluggish but determined, like a sleepy bear waking up for spring. You prod it gently with your knuckle and watch the indentation linger. A good sign. It's growing, breathing, stretching in the heat near the hearth like it knows what it's supposed to become. You nudge the bowl just a little closer to the embers, then settle back with the satisfied sigh of someone who has at least temporarily outwitted yeast. You spend the rising time sharpening your bread knife, slow, lazy strokes along the whetstone, letting the rhythm calm your nerves. There's something deeply reassuring about repetitive tasks like this. Grind, lift, swish. It's the same movement your uncle used when he wasn't polishing axes or trying to whittle a spoon that looked like a horse. He failed every time, and yet he persisted. It's during the second sharpening stroke that you hear the distant thunk of someone dropping a full pail, followed by a mild curse and the skittering of small feet, likely children, possibly chickens, possibly both. You ignore it. Bread is happening. You stretch your limbs and consider your next step shaping. You flour the table, just a dusting enough to make it look like you know what you're doing, and turn the dough out of the bowl. It sighs and slumps into the flour, soft and slightly sticky. You begin folding, tucking in the corners like a baker's version of origami. Your hands know this motion well. In turn, press. In turn, press. Your fingers glide across the dough like they're tracing memory. You're not even thinking now, just feeling. There's an odd intimacy in shaping something you'll eventually eat. You cradle it almost. The dough feels alive because, well, it is. You shape it into a round loaf, rustic, uneven, full of personality, and dust the top with flour. Then, with the tip of a knife, you score a simple cross on the top, for steam, for luck, for flair. Historians still argue whether these cuts were purely practical or if they held ritual significance. Some say it was to prevent the dough spirits from getting trapped. Others believe the pattern signaled ownership in communal baking pits. You personally think it was just early bread branding. You'd carve your initials, but you don't want to look pretentious. You cover the loaf again and set it to proof a shorter rise this time, just enough to give it strength before facing the fire. You glance around while you wait. The day has turned overcast again. Pale light filters through the door, casting soft shadows across your floor. The fire pops once, sending a lazy spark skyward. You nudge your drying seaweed further from the flame. It smells better untoasted. The proofed loaf is ready sooner than expected. It has puffed slightly relaxed into itself like a cat settling in for a nap. You pick it up gently, placing it onto the heated stone near the hearth just as the coals reach their mellow peak. Then you place the lid over it, your faithful clay dome seasoned with soot and good intentions. This moment always feels like casting a spell. You've done your part. Now the heat decides. While it bakes, you get to cleaning, sweeping crumbs into a gourd bowl, folding linens, and rediscovering the remains of an onion you abandoned last week. It's only slightly squishy. You place it in the maybe soup pile. You think of the bread baking rituals from other regions, how some Viking settlements blended local traditions with those they traded with. There are records of flatbreads spiced with fennel seeds from far-off markets, and rumors of sweetened loaves flavored with wild honey and dried berries. You've tried adding berries once. The result was a purple disaster that exploded in the oven. Still, it smelled great. Your grandmother always said, "You can't trust a loaf that doesn't leak something." Wise words. Possibly invented to justify her famously runny cheese loaves, the smell of baking hits you like a warm hug. That golden yeasty perfume with a hint of smoke and earth. You close your eyes and just breathe it in. There's nothing quite like it, rich, ancient, comforting. The smell of something becoming real. After some time, you lift the dome. There it is. Your newest loaf sits proudly on the stone crust, crackled edges browned just shy of burnt. You give it a gentle tap. It responds with a deep, satisfying thump. A hollow belly drum of success. You lift it with both hands and place it beside the earlier ones. You marvel at it for a moment, admiring your own handiwork. Slightly lopsided with a cross so crooked it looks like it was carved by a tipsy squirrel, but undeniably bred. You tear off a small piece from the side, cautious at first. The crust snaps, the inside steams. The crumb is tighter than you'd like, slightly dense, but still soft. The flavor is nutty, tangy, rich, with a whisper of smoke. You smile and whisper to no one in particular. Could have been worse. The sourdough starter gurgles in approval or warning, hard to tell. Outside, the day is fading. You wrap your loaves in linen, placing them in the woven basket you use for bartering. Tomorrow, you'll take them to market. You'll trade for onions, maybe eggs. Someone always needs bread. You look at your flour sack low again, and you sigh. The rhythm never ends. But there's comfort in that too. The endless kneading, the soft rise, the heat, the waiting, the slice. You have fire, you have flour, you have another loaf. You've survived another Viking baking day. You wake up to the gentle tap-tap of rain on your roof, a soothing rhythm that almost makes you forget how damp your socks are. The coals in the hearth have cooled to a lazy glow, casting faint shadows against the walls, while the scent of last night's loaf still lingers in the air like a proud perfume. It's early, but your body already knows what the day will ask of it. The bread you made yesterday sits under a linen cloth, modest and whole. One of the loaves is destined for trade this morning. You lift the cloth and inspect it, still holding together, still smelling vaguely of barley and fire. You wrap it up again and place it in your satchel, careful not to squish the crust. Bread has a way of turning personal when you've coaxed it from nothing. You pull on your cloak, damp at the edges but warm enough, and step outside. The rain is light, more like mist, and the path to the trading yard is wind underfoot. You pass neighbors heading in the same direction, a woman balancing a basket of turnips on her hip, a boy carrying a squawking chicken upside down by the legs, and an elderly man walking slowly with a bundle of dried herbs that smells suspiciously like last winter's cough remedy. Everyone is trading something. At the market square, really just a flattened circle of mud ringed by huts, people are already laying out their goods. Clay bowls, bundles of fish, little pots of pungent cheese. You see a woman arranging dyed wool and another with baskets of early apples, small and knobby but brightly colored. You find your usual corner beneath the lean-to and unwrap your loaf like it's a sacred relic. A few passers-by sniff approvingly. One asks barley or rye. You answer, bit of both and a little oat. They nod, the kind of nod that means respect. The first offer you get is 3 onions and a cracked needle. You decline politely. Next, someone offers a small pouch of dried lingonberries and a duck feather. Tempting, but no. Eventually, you land a good trade, a slab of dried fish, a pinch of salt, and a clean clay cup. A fair deal. You pass over the loaf, which the trader cradles like it's a newborn. You resist the urge to say goodbye. Historians still argue whether Viking marketplaces were truly organized or more like controlled chaos with the occasional sword fight. The sagas mention both peaceful exchanges and the odd brawl over fermented herring. You've seen neither today, just a lot of rain and the subtle dance of bartering. You walk back home with your fish, your salt, your new cup swinging at your side. You can already picture dinner: toasted bread, flaked fish. Maybe a smear of wild herb paste if you're lucky. You feel rich. Well, bread rich, which is the only currency that really matters when your teeth are strong and your stomach is empty. Back inside, you feed your starter half a cup of flour and a splash of water stirred gently with your trusty spoon. It bubbles sluggishly in response like an old friend waking from a nap. You smile. You might have traded your loaf, but the heart of it is still here. With the rain still pattering and the fire relit, you decide to experiment. There's some leftover ale, slightly flat, and a handful of dried herbs you gathered last week. You crush a few between your fingers, thyme perhaps or something, pretending to be thyme, and add it to a fresh bowl of flour. A splash of ale goes in next, followed by a spoon of your sleepy starter and a few dashes of salt. The result: a dough that smells like someone spilled their lunch in a garden, but in a good way. You knead it until it stops sticking to your fingers and starts behaving like dough. Then cover it with your linen cloth and leave it to think about its future. While it rests, you carve a new dough paddle. Your old one snapped yesterday, mid-stir, and you've been improvising with a stick ever since. This new paddle is smoother, flatter, and slightly curved. You test it on the bowl, it fits perfectly. Success. You glance out the door again. The rain has slowed, leaving everything slick and shiny. The air smells of wet earth smoke and bread you wish you hadn't already traded. You sit back beside the hearth, letting the warmth wash over you. You sip some of that flat ale less, drink more historical curiosity, and hum a tune you half remember from childhood. Something about trolls and flour sacks and stolen eggs. It makes no sense, but it's soothing. Your dough is rising slowly, promising another loaf, another meal, another barter. You wonder what tomorrow's trade might be. Maybe someone will offer berries or butter, or even another story. You like the stories best. They don't keep you warm, but they make the waiting easier. As the fire crackles and the dough breathes quietly in its bowl, you feel something rare and precious: contentment. Bread, rain, and time. That's the Viking baking life. The dough from your ale and herb experiment has risen lopsided and enthusiastic, with a scent that hovers somewhere between meadow picnic and very old brewery. You lift the linen cloth and peer at the bubbles on the surface. Promising, possibly dangerous. You give it a cautious sniff. The ale has mellowed, merging with the herbs into something earthy sweet, and just odd enough to be interesting. You scrape the dough from the bowl, dusting your work table with flour to contain its ambitions. It spreads slightly when it lands soft and sticky, like it has no intention of holding shape unless you make it. So you do. You stretch it, fold it, coax it into something resembling a loaf. It fights you a little, then yields. Just like everything else in this life. You grab your new dough paddle, the one you carved yesterday, and test its edge along the bottom of the dough. Smooth, firm, satisfying. You smile. Good tools make better bread, or at least they make you feel like you know what you're doing. Now, for the shaping, you decide to try something bold. Not a round loaf this time, but a braided twist. You've seen Fridas do it with her honey loaves, and she swears it bakes more evenly. She also swears it keeps evil spirits out of the pantry, but you're more interested in the even bake. You divide the dough into 3 lumpy ropes and begin weaving them together gently, like plaiting a sleepy troll's hair. It's not perfect. One strand is fatter than the others, and the ends tuck under awkwardly, but it looks festive. You dust it with flour, set it on a wooden plank, and carry it toward the fire. The hearth is warm, the coals glowing with that deep red heat that feels ancient and calm. You slide the braided dough onto the hot stone and cover it with your faithful clay dome, muttering a small blessing under your breath. Something about not exploding, or at least exploding gracefully. Historians still argue whether braided loaves had any ceremonial meaning in Viking culture. Some suggest they were offerings left at shrines or burial mounds to appease the dead. Others think the shape was just easier to tear into pieces for communal meals. You suspect it's both. Vikings liked efficiency, but they also liked flair. While the loaf bakes, you begin preparing a spread. You crush dried herbs with a little salt and mix in a spoonful of lard, stirring until it turns pale and fluffy. Add a splash of vinegar, a sprig of wild garlic, and it suddenly tastes like something a chieftain might serve with smoked lamb. You glance at the hearth, nose twitching as the scent of baking bread grows stronger, richer than usual, with a hint of ale sharpness. You check the dome, just a peek. The braid is browned unevenly, a little darker on one side, but the crust is firm and the aroma divine. You tap it, hollow thump, done. You pull it from the fire with your new paddle, placing it on the table like a prize. The twist of the braid is still visible, though slightly softened during the rise. It looks homemade in the best way, like something made by hands that care more about flavor than symmetry. You slice a small piece while it's still steaming, smearing it with your herb spreadsheet. The crust cracks gently, the interior soft and springy. The flavor, surprisingly good, nutty herby with just a whisper of ale bitterness at the end. You feel victorious. No one's here to see it, of course, but that's the way of baking. Quiet wins, satisfying solitude. Bread doesn't care if anyone applauds. It just exists or doesn't. Outside, the rain has faded into mist, and the sun is playing peekaboo with the clouds. You think about taking this loaf to Fridas. Let her see what a little risk and a little ale can do. Maybe you'll swap for some of her spruce tip butter, or that weird fermented turnip paste she insists is good for the joints. Either way, it's a trade worth making. You wrap the warm loaf in linen and step outside, boots squishing in the muddy ground. The air is rich with petrichor, and a gull circles lazily overhead, eyeing your parcel with interest. On the way, you pass a group of children chasing each other with sticks, pretending they're raiders. One stops and stares at your bundle. "Is that bread?" she asks, wide-eyed. You nod. "Braided." She gasps like you just said it was made of gold. Bread, you realize, carries more power than most people give it credit for. Especially in a world where food isn't guaranteed and flavor isn't common. A well-baked loaf is part offering, part invention, part survival. You reach Fridas's hut and knock once. She opens the door, a bit flour-streaked herself, and raises an eyebrow at your wrapped bundle. You hold it out like a peace offering, or maybe a challenge. "Ali and herb," you say. She takes it, tears off a piece without ceremony, chews slowly, then nods. "Better than your first loaves." You smirk, low bar. She disappears into the back and returns with a small crock of spruce tip butter, sliding it towards you. Fair trade. You sit for a while, sharing bread in silence, watching the steam curl up from broken crusts and vanish into the cool air. That's the thing about Viking baking. It's never just food, it's friendship. It's failure. It's fungus that gurgles when angry, and tools that snap mid-stir, and herbs that taste like socks unless dried just right. It's quiet work, but meaningful. You pack up what's left and walk home slowly, the smell of bread still clinging to your cloak. Tomorrow you'll bake again. Back at home, the hearth is still warm, and the scent of braided ale bread hangs in the air like a memory refusing to leave. You unfasten your cloak, hang it near the door, and drop the crock of spruce tip butter onto the table with a soft clink. Fridas always gives the good stuff, green, fragrant, just piney enough to make you feel like you've licked a tree. But in a nice way. You settle onto your stool and stare at the remains of your flour sack. Low again. Funny how every successful bake comes with a looming sense of having to do it all over. You finish one loaf and the next is already whispering in your ear, "Feed me." So you do. You pull the starter from its shelf and uncover it. The surface is frothy and pale with one bubble that looks like it might develop opinions if you stare too long. You stir it gently, feeding it the last of your barley flour and some lukewarm water from your clay pitcher. The mixture sags, then starts to rise again, alive and strange. That's one of the peaceful perils of Viking bread baking. The ingredients have moods. The flour changes texture depending on the wind. The starter behaves like a mischievous house spirit, and the fire, well, it's either a gentle cradle or a raging inferno, and rarely in between. You gather your foraging pouch. The flour won't refill itself, and you've heard there's a patch of wild rye still growing near the edge of the village. A steep walk, but you need the exercise anyway. The bread belly is real. As you head out, the village is quiet again. The rain has passed, leaving the grass damp and gleaming. You spot Sigmund wrestling a fishing net out of a tree. He nods at you, and you lift your pouch in reply. Everyone's got their rituals. His involve fish. Yours involve fungus and flour. The path winds uphill, growing rockier as it curls toward the forest's edge. You pass a few tufts of chickweed and make a mental note to gather some on the way back. Great for soup, not great in bread. Learn that one the hard way. You find the rye patch near an old fence post that's leaning like it's considering retirement. The stalks are thin, golden, whispering secrets to one another in the breeze. You kneel and begin collecting the seed heads, careful not to strip too much. Leave some for the next forager or the birds. Historians still argue whether Viking grain foraging was routine or only a last resort. Some archaeological finds suggest regular harvesting of wild grains, while others point to established field rotations and small-scale barley plots. Maybe it depended on how good your luck or your livestock was that year. Either way, you're here for the old-fashioned kind today. Once your pouch is half full, you head back humming a tune that sounds vaguely like a lullaby, but might actually be a drinking song. It's hard to tell with Viking melodies. Everything circles back to mead eventually. Back home, you dry the rye grains over a tray near the fire, letting the warmth draw out the last of the damp. While they dry, you bring out your saddle quern, the heavy stone grinder that doubles as a conversation starter, and occasional ankle bruiser. You pour the dried grain onto the top stone and begin the slow, rhythmic process of grinding. Back and forth. Push-pull. The grain crunches under the pressure, turning into flour little by little. It's not fast, but there's something hypnotic about it, like shelling peas or untangling fishing line. A task that tugs you into a slower rhythm. You pause now and then to brush the fresh flour into a bowl, watching the soft puffs of dust swirl in the afternoon light. The new flour is coarse and warm, full of potential. As you grind, your mind drifts to bread legends, tales of bakers who could knead dough so smooth it sang, or women who kept sourdough alive for 20 years, passing it from daughter to daughter like a prized relic. You wonder if your starter will survive you, or if one day someone will look at it and decide it's just too weird to keep feeding. The bowl fills slowly, and you dust your hands off, satisfied. You've got enough for one solid loaf, maybe two if you stretch it with oat husk or that last bit of spelt hiding behind your oil jar. You'll figure that part out tomorrow. For now, you stretch your arms, rinse your hands, and stoke the fire. The light outside is beginning to shift again. The long golden strands of late afternoon giving everything a soft, forgiving glow. You toast a leftover slice from your braided loaf on the fire's edge, watching the crust darken and the surface begin to crisp. You smear it with spruce butter and take a bite. It tastes like pine smoke and effort. And it's perfect. The peaceful peril of Viking baking isn't just the unpredictable starter or the threat of your dome cracking mid-bake. It's the quiet compulsion that sneaks in after every success, this drive to make more, to do better, to risk it again. Because once you've tasted good bread, you can't go back. And thankfully, you don't have to. Not as long as the fire keeps burning and the flour keeps coming. Evening settles across your village like a Woolen blanket, soft gray, slightly damp at the edges. You sit by the hearth again, the coals glowing lazily beneath the blackened dome where so many loaves have lived and died. The new flour rests in its bowl cool now, ready to become something useful by morning. But tonight, you're not baking. Tonight, you're thinking. You pull your knees up on the bench and sip a mug of warm mead, just a little, just enough to blur the edges of the day. You're trying to remember where your obsession with bread even began. Maybe it was that time you watched an elder knead dough with their elbows because their hands were too stiff. Or maybe it was the smell, the way the scent of baking seemed to chase away worry. Like the fire was telling you, you're not hungry yet. Outside, you hear faint laughter. A group of neighbors is gathering near the longhouse for a storytelling circle. The sound drifts through the night air, mingling with the occasional bleat of a goat and the muffled grumble of someone tripping over a basket. You could go. You could bring a few scraps of bread, trade them for gossip stories, maybe a dried plum or two. Instead, you decide to stay in. Some evenings are meant for solitude. You reach for your notebook. Well, not a notebook exactly, but a slab of bark where you scratch bread notes with a sharpened bone tip. You've started logging your combinations, your starters' moods, even the temperature near the hearth when things go right. You mark today's success ale and herb braid slightly uneven browning excellent crust. You draw a little star beside it. Historians still argue whether Vikings documented their recipes. Most records suggest an oral tradition. Recipes passed through conversation, not ink. But every so often, someone finds a scratch mark on a bone or a wooden plank with strange symbols. Maybe notes, maybe boredom, maybe the first food blog written in runes. You flip your bark slab and jot down an idea. Crush juniper in next loaf. Underneath that, a second note. Ask Freitas if she still has that smoked sea salt. Then you sit in silence for a while, watching the last glow of your hearth fire flicker like it's winking at you. The smell of smoke curls into your cloak, sweet and bitter. It's the smell of every baking day you've ever had. Eventually, you reach for your starter peel, back the cover, and give it a little stir just to say goodnight. It bubbles softly, forgiving your interruption like a cat kneading a blanket in its sleep. You whisper, "Tomorrow then," and place it back on its perch. You remember your uncle once tried to name his starter. Called it Bjorn Doe. It died within a week, which some say was coincidence and others say was divine punishment. You've never named yours, seems safer that way. Your thoughts wander, as they always do after dark, and settle on the idea of the perfect loaf. It doesn't exist, of course. Not really. There's always something too dense, too wet crust, too dark, crumb, too tight, but that doesn't stop you from chasing it. You remember a tale you once heard about a baker who tried to impress a visiting chieftain, baked a loaf so large it took 2 men to carry it, and had goose fat braided into the crust. When it cracked in half during baking, the baker cried in front of everyone. The chieftain laughed, declared it the best bread he'd ever eaten, and married the baker's sister on the spot. Bread changes lives like that sometimes. You stretch your legs and yawn, considering your flour stores again. You've still got a pinch of rye left, a scoop of oat. And maybe, if you're brave, a bit of that chestnut flour tucked away in your back jar. The chestnut flour is tricky, temperamental, likes to burn, and smells like wet bark if used too heavily. But in small doses, it's magic. Tomorrow, maybe. Yes, tomorrow. You wrap yourself in your thickest shawl and lie back on your bench, staring at the smoke-blackened beams above your head. You trace the patterns in the wood grain with your eyes, letting your mind drift toward dreams. Dreams of loaves that don't collapse, of markets where everyone barters in song, of a starter that never sulks, never stinks, and always rises on command. The peaceful perils of Viking baking aren't just in the heat or the hunger or the weather. They live in the quiet obsession. In the dreams of better flour, brighter coals, bolder crusts, in the way your heart lifts every time you lift a lid and see that a loaf has survived. You close your eyes and you smile. Tomorrow is another baking day. You rise before the sun, the air still holding on to the chill of night. A thin layer of ash coats the coals in your hearth. But when you poke them with the edge of your paddle, they glow red again, sleepy embers remembering their duty. You feed them slivers of dry wood, and soon the fire begins to hum low and warm. Another baking day has arrived. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and glance at your flour stores. Not much, but just enough. You pull your starter from its perch. It's frothy this morning, perky, even clearly pleased with itself. You stir it gently and smile. It has the same smell as always, sour, nutty, and vaguely like wet wool, which in Viking times means it's perfect. You pour a scoop into your clay bowl, followed by your freshest flour blend, half rye, a pinch of oat, and the chestnut flour you've been saving. You hesitate before adding it, then go for it. A heaping spoonful. You whisper, "Don't embarrass me," as you stir it in. Chestnut flour is the wild card of the Viking world. It lends a subtle sweetness, a woody undertone, but only if you use just the right amount. Too much and the loaf collapses, the crust burns, or worse, it smells like wet socks. Historians still argue whether chestnut flour was a common ingredient or an occasional indulgence. Some say it was used ceremonially. Others believe it was foraged by desperate bakers with nothing left to grind. Either way, you like to live dangerously. The dough comes together slowly. You knead it with the heel of your hand, pressing and folding until your arms ache and your palms are dusted with flour. You pause only to blow hair out of your eyes and scratch an itch on your nose with your elbow. Viking multitasking at its finest. Once the dough is smooth, elastic, and slightly tacky, you shape it into a modest round. No braid today. Just a simple loaf, honest and unassuming. You place it on a floured board and cover it with your linen cloth and set it near the hearth to rise. While it rests, you prepare your dome, scraping the soot, brushing the inside with a dry birch twig, and checking for cracks. Your dome is old, its clay surface darkened by years of flame. You pat it once like you might a horse. Hold together, old friend. You sit by the fire and sip some warm water steeped with mint and sage. Your thoughts drift, as they often do, to what others in the village are baking, if they're baking at all. Not everyone bothers, of course. Some prefer flat cakes cooked on hot stones or dense barley bricks you could use as weapons. But the real bakers, you know them by the smell of their cloaks and the soot on their sleeves. You think of Torhold, who bakes hers with seaweed and swears it's a Viking delicacy. You've tried it once, tasted like salt, and regret. Then there's Eric, who insists on baking at midnight under the full moon for spiritual symmetry. His loaves are dry but very symmetrical. Everyone has their method. Your dough has risen well. You prod it gently with a finger, slow bounce back. Perfect. You dust your baking stone and carefully transfer the dough, adjusting it so the shape is even. You lower the dome over it, sealing in the warmth and whispering one last promise: I won't open too early. The waiting begins. You lean back against the wall and listen to the faint crackle of the fire, the occasional pop of sap in the wood, and the soft rising tension of dough inside clay. You don't dare peek too soon. That's a rookie mistake. Every baker knows the dome has its own rhythm, and interrupting it is like waking a sleeping bear for fashion advice. Not smart. You use the time to prep your spreading bowl. Today it'll be honey and crushed hazelnuts. A rare treat found some nuts buried under last year's storage heap, shockingly unspoiled. You roast them briefly, then pound them into a paste with a dash of salt and mix in the golden honey Fridas gave you. It glows in the bowl like treasure. Finally, you lift the dome. Slowly, carefully, the crust is perfect. Brown, crackled, gently blistered. You tap it with your paddle, a deep, resonant sound like knocking on the door of a good friend. You lift the loaf out and set it on a cloth to rest. The aroma is rich, nutty, slightly sweet, not a trace of wet sock. You tear off a piece, let the steam curl around your fingers, and smear it with the honey nut spreads. It's astonishing. You take another bite, then a third. The chestnut flour has worked its quiet magic, softening the loaf's edges, adding a creamy finish to every chew. It's rustic, hearty, and just a little decadent. The kind of loaf you could serve to a wandering bard and earn yourself a poem. You wrap the rest carefully and decide to visit the shoreline. Maybe trade a few slices for sea salt or smoked mussels or a new reed basket. You tuck the loaf into your pack, grab your staff, and step out into the morning. The air smells like damp leaves and possibility. The path to the shoreline weaves through low grass and boulders worn smooth by centuries of rain. Your boots squish in places where the moss has given up on being dry. Above you, the sky stretches pale and yawning, full of slow-moving clouds, the kind that can't decide whether to break apart or start a storm. You whistle softly as you walk. Not a tune, really, more a rhythm to match your steps. Your pack is warm against your back, still radiating the scent of the chestnut loaf inside. Every few paces, you catch a whiff and smile. It feels like walking with a secret. Down by the shore, the air sharpens. Salt clings to everything here, your cloak, your eyelashes, even the bread if you're not careful. The tide is low, exposing muddy flats dotted with seaweed and the occasional crab doing its best impression of a rock. You spot Kari almost immediately. She's hunched over a pile of baskets, sorting shells from baitfish and muttering to herself. Her hair's tied back in a knot that looks like it lost a fight with a bird. You approach and offer a nod. Morning. She glances up, eyes narrowing. You've got something in that pack, don't you? You raise an eyebrow. I always have something in this pack. Is it edible? You pull out the loaf and unwrap it slowly, like unveiling a royal jewel. The crust glistens faintly where the steam condensed and the aroma rises like an offering. Kari leans in. Is that chestnut? You nod. And not the footsock kind. She snorts. Miracle? You hand over a slice. She tears it with her teeth, no hesitation, and chews thoughtfully. This is ridiculous, she mumbles with her mouth full. I'd trade half a smoked eel for another piece. You shrug. I'll settle for sea salt. She tosses you a small linen pouch before you can finish the sentence. Done. You sit on a driftwood log and share the rest of the loaf between you, watching the tide inch forward. Kari tells you about the latest village gossip, who's marrying whose goat ate an entire shirt, who fell asleep in the longhouse bath and snored loud enough to scare the crows. She asks what you'll bake next, and you shrug. Thinking of trying sprouted barley, maybe with honey. She raises her eyebrows. Ambitious. Historians still argue whether Viking bakers used sprouted grain intentionally or just forgot their storage protocols. Some evidence suggests they malting their grain for brewing and sometimes incorporated the sweet sprouted product into bread. Others argue it was a happy accident, moisture time, and desperation combining in unexpected culinary triumphs. After the final crumbs have been licked from fingertips, you walk back home with the pouch of sea salt swinging from your belt. It clinks gently with every step like a tiny chime. As you reach your hut, you spot two children poking at something near your doorstep. One holds a stick like a weapon. The other is giggling. What are you up to? You call out. They jump, then point. There's a bird stuck under your bench. You approach slowly. Sure enough, a small, puffed-up creature sits tucked in the corner, muddy fluffed, and deeply offended by its predicament. A black guillemot by the looks of it. Probably wandered inland by mistake. Or perhaps lured by the smell of bread. You reach down and carefully scoop it up, hands steady. It protests once, then settles. You carry it to the edge of the trees and set it down gently. It waddles away with the wounded pride of someone who's lost a bet. Thank you, bird judge, the children say solemnly. You return to your home and place the pouch of salt near your jars. Your stores are looking better now. Rye, oat, chestnut flour again soon if you can find more. Maybe you'll trade with the folks from the inland settlement next week. They're a strange bunch, always putting dried berries in everything. Their bread tastes like pie. You're jealous. You light the hearth again, just a little flame to warm the space. You mix a tiny batch of dough for tomorrow's test loaf. This one with the new salt and a spoonful of mead. You watch the starter bubble as it hits the flour, rising like a small sigh. And then, because it feels right, you press a thumbprint into the dough before covering it to rest. Not for superstition, not even for luck, just to say I was here. The wind picks up overnight, whistling through the gaps in your wooden shutters and nudging the embers in the hearth until they glow like sleepy coals dreaming of fire. You wake before dawn again, drawn by the pull of unfinished dough and the quiet promise of the oven. Your hands find the bowl before your eyes are fully open. You lift the cloth and inhale. The dough has puffed up slightly, spreading like it's trying to escape in slow motion. You press a finger into it. It holds the dent. Good. You rise, stretch. Crack your knuckles and reach for your paddle. Today's loaf isn't large, just a single round made with the salt you got from curry and a splash of mead. It smells sweet already, even unbaked, which feels like cheating, but you allow it. You shape the dough, gently folding and tucking with soft hands like smoothing out a thick woolen blanket. The dough sighs under your touch, pliant and sleepy. You settle it into a little basket lined with flax cloth, cover it again, and let it rest while you tend the fire. You feed the hearth kindling, coaxing the flame with soft whispers and a few well-placed insults. It wakes, eventually grumbling like an old man, and you place the dome nearby to warm. This clay dome, cracked, patched, seasoned with years of loaves and dreams, is your most reliable baking partner. You wouldn't trade it for anything, except maybe a second one. While the dough rises, you clean up yesterday's flour mess and sniff your starter. Still lively, still strange. You smile. Maybe you'll dry some of it soon, just in case. You've heard some folks roll it into balls and bury it in ash to preserve it for lean seasons. Others smear it on bark and let it dry in the sun. Viking vacuum sealing, more or less. Historians still argue whether these preservation methods were common or just regional quirks. There's evidence of dried yeast mixtures in northern settlements, but no one agrees on whether they were intended for bread or mead brewing. Knowing Vikings, probably both. Possibly at the same time. You return to your dough. It's risen well in the warmth near the fire. You flip it gently onto a dusted plank and admire the shape, round proud with a little swirl on top where your folding left a trace. You score it with your favorite bone blade, carving a soft spiral into the top, then lift it carefully and slide it onto the hot stone inside the hearth. The dome goes down with a satisfying thunk, and the scent of ferment and flour begins to fill the room. You sit back watching the fire flicker and breathe. As the loaf bakes, you prepare a new experiment. Just a small one, a mix of oat flour and leftover bits of dried apple. You found the apples while cleaning your back shelf, a tiny sack you thought was empty. They're leathery now, barely sweet, but they'll do. You crush them into bits and stir them into a paste with a pinch of honey and some warm water. You add flour, slowly kneading, until it becomes something sticky, odd, but not entirely unpromising. You press it into a flat disc and set it near the hearth, not to bake just yet, but to start its rise. You're not sure what you'll call it. Maybe bread, maybe oops. That's the thing about Viking baking. Sometimes the difference is just 10 minutes in a hotter fire. After a little while, you lift the dome and peer inside. The mead loaf has bloomed. The crust is golden, almost glossy, with a single crack along the spiral, where steam pushed its way out like a tiny sigh of satisfaction. You pull it from the fire and set it on the table, letting it cool. It's smaller than your usual loaves, but something about it feels finished. Complete. Like it's already earned a spot in your invisible recipe log. You slice off a corner while it's still steaming and blow gently before tasting it. Sweet but not sugary. The mead left behind a warmth that hits the back of your tongue, soft and lingering. The salt from curry adds depth. Sharp and briny, like a memory of ocean wind. You nod to yourself. This one goes in the bark journal. You don't bother writing it down right away. You'll remember. Loaves like this lodge in your mind like stories. You'll probably dream about it later and wake up trying to replicate the feeling. The apple oat experiment sits beside the hearth, now rising slowly, beginning to form little bubbles on the surface. It's lumpy strange, but you think it might have potential. A dessert bread, maybe? Or a breakfast loaf for the kind of morning that needs cheering up. You let your fingers trail through the flour dust on the table, drawing spirals. Not the fancy runes, just lazy curves. You hum a little tune you don't recognize, something drifting from your chest more than your mind. This is the part of baking no one talks about, the in-between. The pauses, the silence before slicing, the watching, waiting, wondering. The moment you look at a lump of dough and think, I made that, but also, did I make that? You lean back full of bread and half-formed ideas. Outside, the wind shifts. You close your eyes and let it move through the shutters and across your skin. The loaf cools. The experiment rises. The day stretches open. Tomorrow, maybe you'll try seaweed again. Maybe. The final loaf of the day cools on your table, cracked slightly at the top, like it's smiling in its sleep. The apple oat experiment rests beside it, still unfinished. Still rising like a child that hasn't quite figured out who they are yet. You watch it with mild suspicion and gentle encouragement, as any baker would. Evening falls slowly, as if the sun is reluctant to leave. The air in your hut is warm now, a mix of clay and spice and a little residual toastiness from the hearth. You don't need to tend the fire anymore. It's done its job. You pat the dome once for good measure, thanks old friend, and turn away. You slice the cooled loaf with a careful hand, letting the blade do the work. The crumb is soft, speckled with pockets where the mead bubbled to the surface and left behind ghostly trails of flavor. You tear off a piece and taste again. Still good. Still yours. You tuck the loaf into a basket lined with cloth and gather your things. Tonight is the evening market, trading, gossiping, possibly dancing, if someone gets their hands on a second jug of wine. You won't stay long. Just enough time to trade bread for dried herbs, maybe a new baking stone if someone's feeling generous. Or reckless. As you walk into the village square, you're greeted by the sounds of life laughter. Footsteps, a sheep bleating in the distance like it's insulted by everything. Lanterns flicker. Children dart between legs and baskets. Somewhere, someone is trying to play a bone flute and mostly succeeding. You set up your little table, just a plank of wood balanced on 2 barrels, and unwrap your bread. People drift over slowly, drawn not just by the smell, but by curiosity. What's this one? Someone asks. Mead and salt, you reply. Sweet and stormy. They nod, taste, smile. Coins clink, or small trades are made, a handful of dried plums, a wedge of soft cheese, a scarf that smells faintly of sheep. Torhild stops by. She eyes the loaf, then your little flat round of apple oat, which you've brought along out of sheer optimism. That one looks confused, she says. It's new, you reply. Be gentle. She laughs and trades you a vial of sea buckthorn oil anyway. You suspect it's just for moral support. Historians still argue whether Vikings had designated bakers' stalls at regular markets or simply bartered bread informally. Some longhouse sites show areas scorched from frequent fire use, suggesting baking was sometimes a communal or mobile activity. Others believe the role of a dedicated bread maker was rare and usually seasonal. Either way, in your village, bread gets around. As the night goes on, you hear tales of a ship arriving soon from across the fjord, bringing smoked mackerel linen scraps, maybe even a jar of pickled walnuts. You make a mental note to prepare a gift loaf in case they're the generous type. Travel-weary traders tend to value food they don't have to chew through, like tree bark. You pack up slowly as the crowd thins. A few crumbs linger on the cloth. Your basket is lighter now, only 1/2 loaf left, and the round oat apple thing, which you've decided isn't so bad after all. The texture is different but not unpleasant. You might try it with cinnamon next time if you can talk Kari out of her stash. Back home, you set the remaining bread near your window, letting the night breeze keep it cool. You feed your starter, whispering, "Good job today," as you stir. It bubbles in agreement or indigestion. Hard to say. You scratch one more note into your bark log, salt mead loaf success. Try buckthorn oil added to crust. Then, finally, you clean your hands and your tools. You sweep the flour off the table and onto the floor where the goats will find it in the morning and judge you silently. You sit by the hearth one last time, wrapping yourself in your softest shawl. The fire is just glowing now, no flame, just memory. You watch it until your eyes blur. You've fed the starter, you've traded the bread, you've told the dough who you are, and that's enough for today. As the fire dies down to a dull orange glow, you let yourself ease into the stillness of the room. The only sounds are the occasional creak of old wood and the soft, shifting breath of the wind moving through the shutter slats like a lullaby hummed by the world itself. Your hands are tired in the best way, flour dusted, and work the ache of effort wrapped in the satisfaction of something finished. The smell of warm crust lingers in the air, mingling with the faintest hints of smoke and old herbs drying on the rafters. Even your bones seem to settle into place. Out in the dark, the village sleeps. Somewhere, someone is snoring. Somewhere else, a dog is chasing dreams through the grass with its paws twitching. But here, in your little baking corner of the world, everything is still. You close your eyes and breathe in deep honey chestnut ash and quiet. You've done what you came to do today, and tomorrow will rise like dough on a warm stone. Slow, steady, waiting for the touch of your hands. So rest now. Let the embers keep you company. Let the silence hold you. Let the weight of your breath fall gently into sleep like a loaf, resting after the bake golden warm and perfectly still.